The bailiff felt it before anyone else in the room did. That prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the same one he'd learned to trust over 2 decades of standing at Judge Judy's side. Something was wrong with the man standing at the plaintiff's podium. Something in the way he held his briefcase, the way he kept glancing at the door, the way he'd corrected the court clerk on procedure, incorrectly, and with a kind of confidence only a fraud possesses. Petrie Hawkinsbird had seen a lot of things in Stage 52 at Sunset Bronson Studios. He'd seen liars, cheats, con artists, and desperate people willing to say anything to walk away with a check. But this was going to be something else entirely. This was going to be the kind of case people talked about for years. Karen dragged her so-called lawyer husband into Judge Judy's courtroom to intimidate a hard-working small business owner out of nearly $5,000. She thought bringing a man in a suit with a briefcase would be enough to scare him into folding. She thought the appearance of legal power was the same as actual legal power. And for the first 4 minutes of that hearing, it almost worked. Almost. Because what Judge Judy did next, with nothing more than a single phone call that lasted less than 90 seconds, didn't just end the case. It exposed a 22-year-long fraud, destroyed a marriage in real time on national television, and sent one man to a waiting sheriff's deputy in the hallway before the credits even rolled. But here's the part nobody saw coming. The moment Judge Judy dialed that number, the lawyer husband tried to run. He actually tried to run. And the bailiff had to physically step sideways and block the aisle to keep him in the courtroom. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder, the way it always was when the docket promised something interesting. And this docket promised something interesting. A civil suit over a car detailing job gone wrong, or at least, that's what the paperwork said. But anyone who'd been watching Judge Judy long enough knew the paperwork was only ever the surface. The real case was always underneath. The real case was always about the people. And the people who walked through those doors that Tuesday morning were about to become one of the most talked about litigants in the show's 25-year history. The wood-paneled walls of the courtroom seemed to hum with a low, electric tension. The overhead lights cast their usual sharp shadows across the gallery. And at the elevated bench, Judith Scheindlin sat quietly, reading glasses perched on her nose, black robe pressed to perfection, already 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. Before we get into this unbelievable case, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop your city in the comments, so I know where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I love seeing this community grow from every corner of the world. Now, let's get into it. At 78 years old, Judith Scheindlin had presided over more than 12,000 cases in her quarter-century on television. Before that, she'd spent 14 years as a family court prosecutor in New York and another 14 as a supervising judge in that same family court system. She'd seen every kind of scam a human being could invent. She'd seen deadbeat dads who claimed they didn't know they had children. She'd seen slumlords who claimed the mold in their tenants' apartments was a decorative feature. She'd seen con artists so slick they almost believed their own lies by the time they got to her bench. But she'd never seen anyone successfully fool her. Not once. Not in 25 years. Not in 12,000 cases. And she certainly wasn't about to start today. What made Judge Judy so devastating wasn't her size, because she was barely 5 feet 1 inch on a good day. It wasn't her volume, because her voice, while clear and precise, was never naturally loud. It was something quieter than that. Something more dangerous. It was the fact that she had spent 50 years learning how to read people, how to spot a lie in the tremor of a voice, the shift of a foot, the way a hand tightened around a briefcase handle. And the man standing at the plaintiff's podium that Tuesday morning, the man who called himself Gregory Whitmore, attorney at law, was about to find out that no suit, no briefcase, and no rehearsed legalese in the world could hide what Judge Judy had already seen the moment he walked in the door. Her name was Deborah Whitmore, and within the first 30 seconds of her walking through those courtroom doors, you could tell everything you needed to know about her. She was in her mid-50s, though the amount of foundation she troweled onto her face suggested she was fighting that number with everything she had. Her hair was dyed an aggressive shade of auburn that didn't exist anywhere in nature, teased up into a shape that seemed to defy gravity and possibly the laws of physics. Oversized designer sunglasses sat pushed up on top of her head, indoors, because women like Deborah Whitmore did not remove their sunglasses for anyone, including judges. Her handbag was a knockoff, you could tell by the crooked stitching on the logo, but she carried it like it was worth the mortgage on a small house. Chunky gold jewelry clanked with every gesture. And her perfume, my God, her perfume. It arrived at the courtroom about 3 seconds before she did, an aggressive cloud of something floral and expensive adjacent that made the woman sitting in the front row of the gallery cough into her sleeve. Her body language announced her personality before she ever opened her mouth. Arms crossed over her chest. Weight shifted onto one hip. That universal stance of a woman who had spent her entire adult life demanding to speak to managers, filing complaints with corporate offices, and treating every service worker she encountered like a personal servant put on earth to disappoint her. Her nails, long and coffin-shaped and painted a shade of red that could only be described as confrontational, tapped against the wood of the plaintiff's podium in a steady, impatient rhythm. She looked around the courtroom with an expression that suggested she found it beneath her. She sighed loudly. She rolled her eyes at the bailiff. She whispered something to her husband that was clearly meant to be heard by everyone, and she smirked when she caught 2 audience members exchanging glances. But Deborah Whitmore wasn't the most interesting person at that podium. That honor belonged to the man standing beside her. The man she kept gesturing to with the pride of a woman showing off a prize-winning show dog. Gregory Whitmore, allegedly of Whitmore Legal Consulting, was doing his absolute best impression of what a television lawyer looks like, and failing at it in ways that only became more obvious the longer you watched him. His suit was navy blue, off the rack from a department store, and it didn't quite fit across the shoulders. His tie was red, power red, he'd probably called it in the mirror that morning, and it was knotted just slightly too tight, giving his neck a squeezed, sausage-like appearance above the collar. His briefcase was the kind you buy at an office supply store for under $40, complete with a generic logo stamped on the side that no real attorney would ever be caught carrying. And his pen. God, his pen. He kept clicking it. Click, click, click. Over and over again. A nervous tick he'd probably convinced himself made him look thoughtful and important. He wasn't finished performing. Every few seconds, he'd lean toward the spectators in the front row and mutter something about my practice, or when I was in law school, or one of my former clients. He corrected the court clerk on how to spell a docket number, and he was wrong about it. He called the bailiff young man, even though Petrie Hawkinsbird was in his 60s and had been doing this job longer than Gregory had allegedly been practicing law. And when he caught Marcus, one of the young production assistants, glancing at him, he actually winked. Winked. Like they were sharing some kind of professional courtroom secret. Marcus looked away like he'd just witnessed something deeply embarrassing, which, in fairness, he had. Across the aisle at the defendant's podium stood Anthony Ruiz. And if the Whitmores were a masterclass in performative wealth, Anthony was a masterclass in quiet dignity. He was 34 years old, medium build, with the hands of a man who worked for a living. His shirt was clean and pressed, a simple white button-down tucked neatly into dark slacks. His shoes were polished, though you could tell they'd been polished specifically for today. He held his hands folded in front of him at the podium, and he didn't look at Deborah. He didn't look at Gregory. He looked at Judge Judy with the calm, respectful expression of a man who knew he'd done nothing wrong and trusted the process to prove it. He'd built his mobile car detailing business from a single sponge and a rented pressure washer 6 years ago. Now he had 3 employees, a wrapped van, and a 5-star rating across every review site that existed. And he was being sued for $4,800 by a woman he'd already refunded over damage to a car he'd never caused. Beside Anthony stood his attorney, Melissa Ortiz, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been practicing consumer protection law for 18 years. She wore a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry except a simple wedding band, and reading glasses hanging from a thin silver chain around her neck. She had a manila folder open on the podium in front of her, and inside that folder was a stack of documents that told a very different story than the one the Whitmores were about to try to sell. Photos, timestamps, receipts, bank statements showing the refund Anthony had already processed, and one particular Facebook screenshot that was going to end Deborah Whitmore's entire case in about 7 minutes. Melissa had already glanced twice at Gregory Whitmore, and each time she glanced, her eyebrow had lifted just slightly higher. She'd been in enough courtrooms to know what a real attorney looked like, and she was pretty sure, no, she was certain, that whatever Gregory Whitmore was, he wasn't one. At the elevated bench, Judge Judy set down her pen. She'd been reading the case file for the last 2 minutes, and she'd already seen enough. She removed her glasses with that slow, deliberate motion the regulars in the audience had learned to recognize as a warning sign. And she looked up at the plaintiff's podium with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing at all. "State your case," Judge Judy said. 3 words. The same 3 words that had opened more than 12,000 cases in her courtroom. And every single one of them had ended exactly the way she'd intended. She folded her hands in front of her, leaned back slightly in her chair, and waited. Deborah Whitmore straightened up like she'd been waiting for this cue her entire life. She adjusted her blazer, tossed her head in a way that made her chunky gold earrings clank against her jaw, and gave Judge Judy a smile that was somehow both condescending and rehearsed. "Your Honor," she began, her voice dripping with theatrical sweetness, "before we begin, I'd like to inform the court that my husband Gregory is a licensed attorney, and he'll be representing me in this matter today." She gestured toward Gregory with a flourish of a game show hostess revealing a prize. Gregory, for his part, gave the courtroom a small, self-important nod, the kind of nod that said, "Yes, that's right, an attorney, in the flesh, right here in front of you." Judge Judy didn't respond immediately. She just looked at Gregory. Not at his face, exactly. More to him. Her eyes moved from his tie to his cheap briefcase to the click-click-clicking pen in his hand, and back up to his face. It was a look that lasted maybe 2 full seconds. But in those 2 seconds, Petrie Hawkins Bird, standing at his post, felt his shoulders tighten. He knew that look. He'd seen it hundreds of times over the years. It was the look Judge Judy got when she'd already made up her mind about something, but was going to let the other person walk themselves into the trap anyway. "Counselor," Judge Judy said, her voice perfectly even, "what firm are you with?" Gregory blinked. He hadn't expected the question that quickly. He recovered badly, with a small chuckle that came out more like a cough. I have my own practice, Your Honor. Whitmore Legal Consulting. We're a boutique firm. Very selective clientele." "Consulting," Judge Judy repeated. She let the word hang in the air. "Not a law firm. A consulting firm." "Well, it's a law practice that operates under a consulting model," Gregory said, which was a sentence that meant absolutely nothing to anyone who had ever practiced law, but Gregory said it with the confidence of a man who thought it sounded impressive. Judge Judy nodded slowly. "I see. And what's your bar number, Mr. Whitmore?" The click-click-clicking of the pen stopped, just for a second, long enough for the audience in the front row to notice. Gregory's smile stayed pasted on his face, but something behind his eyes flickered. "My bar number," he repeated, like he was buying time. I'd have to check my records for the exact digits, Your Honor. I don't tend to memorize it. Been practicing for so long. You know how it is?" Melissa Ortiz, standing at the defendant's podium, did something almost imperceptible with her mouth. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was the tiniest suppression of a smile, the kind you do when you're trying to be professional, but a small part of your soul is delighted. Because every attorney in America memorizes their bar number. It's on every single document they file. It's on their business cards. It's on their letterhead. Not memorizing your bar number was like a doctor claiming they couldn't remember their medical license number, or a pilot forgetting which airline they flew for. It didn't happen, ever. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but her right hand, which had been resting flat on the desk, moved slightly, just her index finger tapping once against the wood. Once. A tiny, private signal that only the bailiff caught. He straightened up another quarter inch. "That's fine, Mr. Whitmore," Judge Judy said, her voice warm in that way that was somehow more terrifying than if she'd been angry. "We'll come back to that. Let's hear the case. Mrs. Whitmore, Why are you suing this young man?" Deborah launched into her prepared speech with the enthusiasm of a woman who had rehearsed it in the mirror for 3 days. "Your Honor, on May 14th of this year, I hired Mr. Ruiz's so-called detailing business to clean and detail my Mercedes-Benz. When he returned the vehicle to me, I discovered that his so-called professional detailing had caused significant damage to the paint on the driver's side rear panel. A very large, very visible scratch. I have photos, Your Honor. Photos that clearly show the damage were not there before he took possession of my vehicle." "And the amount you're seeking?" Judge Judy asked. $4,800, Deborah said crisply. "That's the estimate I received from the Mercedes dealership for a full repaint of the affected panel plus labor. I want every penny." Judge Judy nodded slowly. She turned to Gregory. "Counselor, do you have those photos ready to present as evidence?" "Absolutely, Your Honor," Gregory said, his confidence returning now that they were back on the script. He fumbled with his phone, swiping through it with the frantic energy of a man who had not actually prepared his exhibits. "I have them right here. Just a moment. Pursuant to Section 402 of the California Consumer Protection Code, subsection D, I move to enter these photographs into evidence, hereby and forthwith." The courtroom went very quiet. Melissa Ortiz's eyebrow, which had already been elevated, now shot up so far it nearly disappeared into her hairline. Because Section 402 of the California Consumer Protection Code did not exist. There was no such statute. There was no such section. And no attorney in the history of jurisprudence had ever, in the entire recorded history of the American legal system, said the phrase hereby and forthwith